Good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate everyone's attendance here this afternoon. This afternoon, we have a joint committee of both the Assembly and the Senate committees on legislative operations and elections. I appreciate everyone being here. And first order of business, Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Assemblyman DeLong.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dixon. Nope. Assemblyman De Silva.
Present.
De Silva, sorry. Assemblywoman Gonzalez. Assemblyman Hibbett.
Here.
Assemblyman MacArthur. Here. Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Assemblyman Miller.
Here.
Assemblywoman Moreno.
Here.
Assemblywoman Newby.
Here.
Assemblyman Yeager.
Here.
Assemblywoman Garlow.
Here.
Senator Daly.
Here.
Senator Gonzalez. I'm sorry, Canizaro. Nope. Senator Severs-Gansard. Senator Krasner. Chair Orenshaw.
Present. Secretary, will you please mark the Assembly members and the senators who are not present as they arrive? And I want to thank Chair Gorlow and all the members of the Assembly Committee for being here for this joint meeting. We will have public comment at the end of our hearing today, and I would ask anyone who's here in the audience in Carson City to please silence your cell phones. On our agenda today, we do have two presentations, and we are going to take them slightly out of order. We are going to start with the presentation from the Office of the Secretary of State. We're very privileged to have Secretary Aguilar here today and Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, Mark Woloshyn. So if we could start with your presentation, and then we'll go on to the presentation from the Ethics Commission after that, and then we'll have public comment. Thank you, Secretary Aguilar, Deputy Secretary Woloshyn.
Ready? Well, good afternoon. Francisco Aguilar for the record. Chair Orenshaw and Chair Gorlow, thank you for having us today, and both members of the committee. It's an honor to be here. For the record, I'm Nevada's Secretary of State, Francisco Aguilar. It is a pleasure, as I said, to be here before you as we talk about the important topic of elections. I'm joined today by Chief Deputy Gabriel Chara, who's with us, but he's not sitting with us, and Mark Woloshyn, who's been with us for quite a bit. He understands elections in detail that most of us don't. I'm lucky to have him as part of the team. And we also have others here from the Elections Division to answer any questions that may come up. As I stated, we are here today to give you a brief overview of the Secretary of State's office, its role in Nevada's elections. I want to start by stating our elections are always conducted in accordance with all federal and state laws. It is important to note up front that we take every election integrity violation complaint seriously and investigate all allegations. To this day, we have seen no evidence of widespread voter fraud or voting machine errors in Nevada during the 2022 election cycle. I highlight that because during this legislative session, there will be many discussions about the future of Nevada's elections and how we can make them better. It is important that these discussions be rooted in fact and not speculation or false narratives. And I eagerly volunteer my staff if you have any questions at any time. I'm also available and ready to answer any questions. The Office of the Secretary of State is one of the original constitutional offices established in the Nevada Constitution and is responsible for maintaining the official records of the acts of the legislature and the executive branch. Additional duties have been added over time and range from Chief Officer of Elections to Registrar of Business Entity Filings to Administrator of the Uniform Securities Act. The Office of the Secretary of State is organized into 8 main divisions: elections, commercial recordings, securities, notary, special projects, which include managing document preparation services, domestic partnerships, Nevada Lockbox, business portal, executive administration, and operations divisions. Additionally, as part of the Elections Integrity Task Force, we work closely with many other law enforcement agencies at the federal, state, and county levels. Our main offices are located here in Carson City, in the Capitol Building, the Myers Annex, and the Blasdall Building. We also have an office in City Hall, North Las Vegas City Hall. And now I'd like to turn the presentation over to Deputy Volashin.
Good afternoon, Chair Orenshaw, Chair Gorlow, and members of both committees. My name is Mark Volashin. I'm the Deputy Secretary of State for Elections, for the record. Over the next 39 slides, I will cover the Secretary of State's Elections Division, our roles and responsibilities, and information about past and ongoing projects. NRS 293-124 directs the Secretary of State to act as the Chief Officer of Elections for the state and makes Secretary Aguilar responsible for the execution and enforcement of the provisions of Title 24 of NRS and all other provisions of federal and state law relating to elections in the state. Established to assist him in these duties, the Elections Division consists of just 13 full-time equivalent positions, including me. We are also supported by 3 full-time contractors. These contractors have been essential in ensuring that a few key legislatively mandated long-term projects have been able to move forward despite significant turnover in the past 2 years. There are now just 3 of my staff members who are working in the division during the 2020 election cycle.
And I think that's a critical point to stop here to recognize. Before I move on, I'd like to let the legislature know that you will hear me and the staff talk about this quite a bit during the session, because the turnover that he just referenced was not routine. It was brought about by aggressive and violent rhetoric aimed at our state and county election officials. These are individuals that are there to work a job to make sure our elections happen. This sort of behavior must not be allowed, and in a few weeks, I'll be back here to present a bill that will protect our election workers from the kind of harassment and intimidation that's forcing our state to see a brain drain when it comes to election management.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. We work closely with a number of other staff members across the agency, including in the Secretary's Security Division, who help us with criminal investigations, the Operations Division, who help facilitate reimbursements to the counties, and IT support to our many proprietary applications used during an election cycle. The Secretary is also the head of the Elections Integrity Task Force, which is made up of a number of other law enforcement agencies to address possible violations of elections law. And we'll discuss that more at a later slide as well. Most importantly, we work hand in hand with our 17 county election officials. 2 in Clark and Washoe counties are registrar of voters appointed by their county commissioners. The other 15 are elected officials with a number of competing responsibilities. They come from a variety of backgrounds and political parties, but are unified in their unwavering dedication to provide free and fair elections. You'll notice that there has been significant turnover at the county level as well. While the loss of institutional knowledge is unfortunate, we have already been discussing means to mitigate that risk, and will be presenting another bill to address it in the near future. Speaking of their responsibilities, the handout graph I provided depicts the election-specific skills your county clerks and registrars are required to master. Please keep in mind, the 15 elected clerks in our smaller counties have numerous other responsibilities that their constituents expect them to attend to, such as being the public administrator, treasurer, or clerk of the court. The demands have only grown over the past 5 years, and elections administration, once a mere 5% of their time, has grown steadily to encompass closer to 25% or even more during an election year. Before discussing the 2022 election cycle, I'm first going to provide some statistics about the Nevada electorate. As of February 1st of 2023, there are approximately 1.8 million active registered voters in Nevada. It's important to clarify what that means. To be an active registered voter simply means that we have verified the identity and address for a voter. An inactive voter means we have received a returned piece of official elections mail that was identified as being undeliverable, or a voter has failed to respond to a confirmation notice from their county clerk. In fact, it's possible to be an active voter without having voted for the past few years. It's also possible to be an inactive voter, but then to go to the polls on election day, show your Nevada driver's license or tribal ID, reclaim your active status, and vote. Turning to the 2022 election cycle, here are the voter turnout statistics from the 2022 primary election, contrasted with those from the 2020 primary. You'll notice that the overall turnout for the 2022 primary was generally on par for a midterm primary election, and just slightly lower than the 2020 primary. Voter turnout for the 2022 general election was also generally on par for a midterm general election. Again, it is contrasted here to the 2020 general election. Reviewing voter turnout in the bottom center of the slide, we can see that election day voting increased over 2020 numbers, which of course were decreased due to concerns about COVID-19. But there was also an increased percentage of voters who chose mail-in ballot voting. It is worth noting that the number of mail ballots cast during the 2022 general election was approximately only 25,000 less than the total number of voters who turned out for the 2014 general election, both in person and absentee. This is significant because it highlights the steady increases over the last 8 years in logistics and personnel requirements, costs, and work required to run our elections at the counties. Now look at the total turnout for the last 3 midterm general elections. That steady increase in participating voters highlights an increasingly involved and attentive electorate as well. Finally, the trends in total turnout for the last 3 presidential election cycles reinforce the expected increase in participation as well, and suggest that we may see an even greater turnout during the 2024 election cycle. Focusing on the use of mail ballots for a minute, prior to 2020, Nevada had a no-excuse absentee ballot process in which any voter could request an absentee ballot. During the 2020 election cycle, mail ballots were employed to mitigate the risk of COVID-19 to both voters and elections personnel. That transition to vote by mail was permanently adopted during the 2021 legislative session through the passage of Assembly Bill 321. Now, for any primary, general, or special election, a mail ballot will be sent to the active registered voters who are eligible to vote in that election. Here are some statistics about the total number of mail ballots sent during the past 2 general elections. You may have noticed that the total number of mail ballots sent in each election is actually larger than the number of active registered voters. This is normal. Some voters don't update their address until after the first batch of mail ballots has hit the mail stream. When they update their voter registration and request another ballot, the barcode on the first ballot envelope is canceled before another is sent. This ensures that even if somebody attempted to mail it back in illegally, it would not be counted. Please note that the number of mail ballots that were returned to county clerks and registrars as being undeliverable decreased from the 2020 general election to the 2022 general election. This highlights the increased effort by your county election officials to ensure that the statewide voter registration list is kept as clean as possible in accordance with federal and state laws. There will always be some ballots that are returned as being undeliverable, specifically because of the transient nature of our electorate. But state and county election officials work very hard on a daily basis to ensure it is maintained properly.
A quick note about this. We are gathering the actual costs from the 2022 general election in order to get a crystal clear picture of what those costs were. Deputy Vilashin has informed me that his team is reviewing the invoices and appears to be about $3.9 million, specifically to cover the costs associated with mail ballots. That includes the cost of ballot stock, envelopes, outbound and return postage, and other associated processing and development fees.
Over the last few years, we recognize that there is an increased demand for voter education and voter engagement. To better inform our outreach and staffing decisions internally, we began tracking the questions we've received through phone calls and emails. The purpose was to identify topics and issues that caused the most voter confusion. This first slide, with statistics on phone calls, is not comprehensive. We're currently working to create and staff a more robust call center that tracks not only our calls received, but also helps us understand precisely how many we've missed. Please note that the majority of the calls we received related to voter registrations, for example, how to change party affiliation, and questions about mail ballots, such as when they were being mailed. Regarding the emails we received at nvelect@sos.nv.gov, The highest number of emails we received related to the biennial regulatory review that we started in January of 2021 and completed in February of 2022. That regulatory review was conducted to update our regulations, increase security and transparency when possible, and identify outdated regulations for repeal. It ended up being a great opportunity for voter engagement and education and helped identify many of the items included in our cleanup bill as well, Senate Bill 60. The second most prominent topic of the emails we received were allegations or questions relating to elections fraud, reflecting the public's concern. Of note, we reviewed every allegation and, when appropriate, refer them to law enforcement. Again, we've seen no evidence of widespread voter fraud or voting machine errors in Nevada. Speaking of elections integrity violation reports, we continued to receive a high volume of EIVRs. These reports, primarily generated by the public, are received via email, fax, and mail. Once upon a time, we'd get perhaps 30 to 50 during an election cycle. During the 2022 election cycle, we received almost 700, and we continue to receive them every week. These reports require significant staff time to review, discuss, and respond to. We discuss them with county clerks and registrars, and we take every allegation seriously. Cases we believe require criminal investigation are referred to the law enforcement officers of our Securities Division. Shifting our focus slightly, I would like to provide an update on a few of the election bills passed during the previous session. Starting with Assembly Bill 121, which was Assemblywoman Cohen's bill to expand the use of the program created to support our military and overseas voters. The Effective Absentee System for Elections, or EASE, is a program that we will discuss in a few slides, but its expansion to include voters with a disability enabled 336 Nevadan voters to cast a ballot from the privacy and comfort of their homes using their ADA-compliant tools. Assembly Bill 126 replaced our caucus system with the presidential preference primary. This new closed primary will enable voters of the two major parties to select their presidential candidates in less than a year. Please note the timelines. Early voting will start just a few weeks after the judicial candidate filing period, and non-judicial candidate filing starts just 2 weeks after the county canvass is complete on February 16th.
It's quite a bit of work to do during a very short period of time, especially between January 1st and February 6th. So.
That's absolutely right, Mr. Secretary. In addition to the judicial candidate filing, officials at the state and county level will have to track and process candidate withdrawals and challenges, conduct poll worker training and pre-election audits, inspect and stage materials for polling locations, and a number of other statutorily required actions, all while processing mail ballots that will be already arriving by that point. Our regulations are still under development and must be completed no later than the last business day in September. The passage of Assembly Bill 321 during the 2021 legislative session meant that Nevada would become a vote-by-mail state, but retained in-person voting opportunities during early voting and on Election Day. Since then, state and county election officials have continuously reviewed and discussed means to improve the process in order to maximize security and reduce costs. It was worth remembering that the 2022 election cycle was only the first cycle under the provisions of Assembly Bill 321. Even same-day voter registration is relatively new, with this just being the second election cycle we've had it as well. Our county election officials have done an incredible job in the implementation and layering of these bills, despite the challenges. And while we identified some tangible improvements to the process in the last election cycle, I'm certain we'll continue to do so in the coming years as well. These two bills, Assembly Bill 422 and Assembly Bill 432 from the 2021 legislative session, are closely related, but distinct projects for implementation. Assembly Bill 422 is the transition from a bottom-up voter registration system to a top-down system. We've provided a one-page summary as part of the record that you have in front of you to help explain the importance of this transition and its positive impacts to the state. The implementation of Assembly Bill 422 began immediately after the 2021 legislative session, but progress has been hampered by the widespread turnover mentioned earlier. This is where our contractors came in to provide consistency and help ensure that the project moved forward. We contracted with Gartner, a consulting company with extensive experience in the election sphere in general, and who has helped other states go through this exact type of transition in the recent past. Their experience and advice has been pivotal in ensuring that we are identifying the proper business and technical requirements and are prepared to begin this complex statewide IT project.
A speedy transition to a top-down system is one of my two major priorities. I believe this will absolutely resolve a number of the issues we have faced in recent years and will further improve the transparency and the security of our elections and have directed staff to implement prior to the June 2024 primary election. This acceleration of the schedule relies on one of our one-shot budget requests being fully funded.
Once the transition to a top-down voter registration system is complete, we'll be able to implement Assembly Bill 432, which requires an expansion of our automatic voter registration process to encompass a number of additional agencies and tribal governments. I'm going to shift my focus again to describe a few of the important elements of our electoral process. These remaining slides will be overviews, but if you are interested in learning more about any one aspect, please reach out and we will provide additional information. Here in Nevada, we use two primary vendors for our voting systems, Dominion Voting Systems and Election Systems and Software, or ES&S. When you discuss voting systems, though, it's important to recognize that that includes more than just the voting machine that you stand in front of when you cast your ballot. These voting systems are really a collection of machines that work together to allow a voter to securely and privately cast their ballot. 15 of our counties use Dominion Voting System machines, and 2, Lander and Carson City, use ES&S voting machines. The process for a voting system company to create and sell a voting machine is elaborate and heavily scrutinized at the federal, state, and county levels. The Federal Election Assistance Commission, or EAC, has standards that must be met and conducts tests before they certify a system for use. NRS 293.2696 requires that any voting systems used in Nevada meet or exceeds the standards for voting systems established by the United States Election Assistance Commission. And the Gaming Control Board helps us ensure that no substandard system is ever used. All of our voting machines that you can actually cast a ballot on are air-gapped as well, or not connected to the internet. Check-in kiosks, which do not connect to the voting machines, are connected to the internet as a means of preventing double voters. When you check in to vote at a kiosk, you are flagged in near real time as having voted. And if you ran down the street to vote at another vote center, it would already recognize that you've cast your ballot and would prevent you from doing so again. That is one of the numerous behind-the-scenes controls that we use to ensure election integrity. Please take a moment to reference the handouts that we provided with the details of some of the voting machines and tabulators in use across Nevada. All of the machines we use as part of our voting systems are the result of decades of improvements in security and accessibility, much of it because of the 2000 presidential election debacle. And our systems are now designed to ensure that all votes are cast and counted accurately and securely while eliminating any hanging chads or ballot box stuffing.
These security measures mean that fears of ballot box stuffing by people who come across a mail ballot that is not theirs are simply not possible. Every cast ballot is the first associated with an active registered voter before it is counted.
Our voting machines all maintain paper audit trails as well. Dominion voting machines are a type of direct recording electronic voting machines, or DRE, and use a voter-verified paper audit trail, or VVPAT, which enables an in-person voter to confirm the accuracy of their ballot before casting that ballot. And the ES&S voting systems are ballot marking devices, or BMDs, which use paper as well. All of the paper records are retained for 22 months after an election in accordance with federal and state law. Mail ballot tabulators are also an important part of our election system since the passage of Assembly Bill 321. The in-person voting machines we previously talked about are separate from the machines required to process mail ballots. And in fact, the in-person voting and mail ballot voting processes are entirely independent processes. These tabulators also require EAC certification and have extensive security requirements. They allow the timely scanning and processing of the large quantity of mail ballots that our county clerks and registrars receive throughout early voting and up to the fourth day after Election Day. However, as with any other method, mail ballots are tabulated at a speed dictated by capacity of both staff and hardware. Since the passage of Assembly Bill 345 in the 2019 session, our state also allows for same-day voter registration. The statistics on the bottom of this slide show that approximately 45,000 voters chose to either initially register or update their voter registrations on the same day that they voted. Automatic voter registration was enacted by the voters in 2018 and further prescribed by Assembly Bill 345. It was implemented in January 2020. It resulted in the registration of eligible voters through automated processes when they conduct specific transactions at the Department of Motor Vehicles. The process also identifies individuals who are not eligible and filters them out. Another important process you will hear about in the coming months is the process by which county clerks conduct voter registration list maintenance. This process is mandated by a combination of federal and state laws, which explicitly identify what must be done and what can never be done to our voter rolls. In general, the intent of these laws is to ensure that voters remain on voter rolls unless they meet specific criteria so they may cast a ballot without administrative obstacles. So here's how the process works on a daily basis. The Elections Division receives information from the agencies listed on this slide, indicating that a voter has, for example, moved, and we in turn provide that information to the county clerks and registrars, who then act upon that information to inactivate a voter's registration. That does not mean that the voter cannot vote. It simply means that they will not receive a mail ballot, but they can still update their registration and vote in person, even up to the close of polls on Election Day. Once a voter's registration is inactive, the county clerks and registrars can only cancel their registration when that inactive voter does not update their voter registration or vote for 2 federal general elections. In the event that we are notified about a voter's death, though, the county clerks and registrars are able to cancel the voter's registration immediately. Following each election, we conduct a risk-limiting audit. The pilot program was required by Senate Bill 123 of the 2019 legislative session. A risk-limiting audit is an additional process used to validate that our paper records from an election accurately report the votes cast. We conducted a pilot program using 4 counties for the 2020 general election and have continued to do so ever since. We will conduct additional pilot risk-limiting audits during our 2 upcoming special elections in the city of Henderson and in Nye County later this year. The following slides describe some of the agency's elections-related websites and provide some context. First up is silverstateelection.nv.gov, which is our website for reporting election night and official results. The statistics from this slide indicate a few things. First, significantly more users came to the site in 2020 than 2022, which is to be expected for a midterm election. Second, the peak in website traffic did not occur until after Election Day. This reflects the reality that in most cases our contests were not decided by election night, and that additional ballots still needed to be counted pursuant to state law. Under our existing law, we must accept mail ballots up to 4 days after Election Day and allow 2 additional days for signature curing. On the 7th day, we do not rest, but instead compare provisional ballots to ensure that they are eligible voters and that none of them attempted to cast a provisional ballot in more than 1 county. Once we have reviewed provisional ballots, clerks and registrars can then finalize the counts and prepare the documentation for the county canvasses, which must occur before the 10th day after the election. This is another of our websites that voters use, Registered Voter Services, available through the nvsos.gov website. It provides a number of useful resources. This is an integral part of the agency's effort to enable voters to make choices based on their preferences and needs, and to update those preferences in a single website. The Nevada Online Voter Application, or NOVA, located at registertovote.nv.gov, is the application through which eligible citizens are able to register to vote. Since its creation in 2010, more than 890,000 individuals have registered to vote online. Of note, the eligibility of these individuals is automatically verified through our collaboration with the DMV and Social Security Administration. Here are the online registration statistics for the 2022 election cycle on the top, and specific to just the 2022 general election at the bottom. These numbers highlight the importance of offering this online service for new registrations and for updates, which help voters maintain the accuracy of their voter registration and to keep their status as an active voter. The next 3 slides describe applications and programs that also help provide transparency and educate the public about Nevada's elections. The first is Aurora, an application that enables the mandated filing of campaign finance documents. This site is used by candidates to file contribution and expense reports, as well as enabling the public full transparency into candidate finances. Senate Bill 557 of the 2019 legislative session revised the requirements for campaign finance reporting. These changes went into effect January 1st of 2020. While there was a reduction in fines collected during the 2020 election cycle, we have since seen the increased compliance, likely due to improvements in our system and reminder emails that we now send to candidates. You can see from this slide that we now have a higher level of compliance than when compared to the 2020 election cycle. We also provide a service for future voters. The student mock election is conducted during every election cycle with the purpose of informing students about the voting process and the importance of their right to vote. Unfortunately, there continues to be a significant drop in involvement with this program. Nonetheless, we will continue to offer it and have ideas as to how we can improve the participation and experience of those participants. Recognizing that our websites are vital to Nevada voters, our office fosters a culture of persistent cybersecurity. This cultural mentality reinforces best practices, stresses the need for constant vigilance, and promotes a keen awareness of the potential impacts of the current cybersecurity environment. To this end, we allocate resources to address both the cyber and physical security requirements needed to ensure fair and secure elections, and to ensure the security of all Secretary of State systems. We request and use grants to enhance our security. We have joined organizations that share election-specific security information, including the Elections Infrastructure Information Sharing and Analysis Center, or EISEC, and the National Association of Secretaries of State and National Association of State Election Directors. And we work with numerous other state and federal agencies to ensure redundancy in our security measures. Doing so has ensured that we are staying on the cutting edge of election security. But that is not to say that there were not threats to our electoral process. I want to highlight that since 2020, we have identified record attempts by domestic and foreign actors to disrupt our websites and services. To be clear, these efforts were not focused at our voting machines, which, as I mentioned before, are standalone or air-gapped units not connected to the internet. But instead, these were efforts to interfere with or degrade our online services. While the attempted attacks during the 2022 cycle were not as numerous as we've seen during a presidential election cycle, you can see from this slide that the threats continue. For context, from October 1, 2020 to December 31, 2020, our security technology blocked more than 5,800 events from impacting silverstateelection.md.gov alone. These attacks did not start on election day, nor did they stop when the election was certified. And while many of these attacks originated overseas, most came from within the borders of the United States. Our ability to block these cyber attacks could not have been possible without the partnerships I mentioned earlier. In addition to our partners in cybersecurity, the Secretary of State is also the lead agency for the Elections Integrity Task Force. The Elections Integrity Task Force is a critical part of our effort to ensure the security of our elections through a collaboration of federal and state law enforcement agencies. The Elections Integrity Task Force formally meets and collaborates each election, with all members maintaining routine and clear lines of communication between elections, sharing best practices, threat warnings, and new developments. The Help America Vote Act is another major part of our effort to ensure election security. Our HAVA team has its hands full ensuring that we effectively manage these sporadically provided federal grants in a manner that will continuously support the improvement of the administration of federal elections. We will be using the HAVA grant to partially pay for our project to transition to a top-down voter registration program. The Effective Absentee System for Elections, or EASE, as referenced before in this presentation, is our application used by the several thousand Nevadans who are currently serving in the military or are living overseas. Again, as mentioned, Assembly Bill 121 expanded its use to include voters with a disability. Federal laws provide voting protections for uniformed service members, their family members, and citizens residing outside of the United States. EASE enables them to register to vote, request a ballot, and to send an encrypted file to their county clerk through our secure server. More than 2,000 individuals were able to vote during this election cycle using the EASE system, and we anticipate that number continuing to grow through our planned increase in outreach. These last slides are about our initiative and referendum process. There were a number of petitions that were initiated and began gathering signatures, but only one that gathered enough signatures to go to the 2022 ballot. Question 3, as you may remember, dealt with open primary elections and ranked choice voting. It was approved by voters and will be listed as question 3 again during the 2024 general election. Nevada is one of only 24 states that have an initiative and referendum process, so these numbers on this slide are particularly important to those citizens who wish to pursue changes. The updated requirements for initiatives and referendum are shown. These are the due dates and signature requirements for any petition to be deemed sufficient.
Believe it or not, that was a brief overview of what the Elections Division has done to support our electorate. Looking to the future, there are a number of projects underway that will further enhance the security and transparency of our elections, which we all want. My top priority for election is the speedy transition to a top-down voter registration program. This is a massive statewide IT project that we must get right the first time. The benefits to this system will help us in this room, our constituents, the public, and the press, and will help keep Nevada elections as the gold standard for the country. Additionally, we must continue to prepare for ongoing cyber attacks. They will not go away and will only gain in complexity and volume during the next election cycle. We know it's going to happen and will continue to work closely with our state and federal partners to ensure our voter data is kept secure and that our elections infrastructure remains unaffected. We must continue to take care of the human component of elections administration and address the physical security, training, and retention of our state and county election officials. Without the professional men and women who administer our elections at the state, county, and city levels, no amount of funding or pragmatic changes will make a difference. We intend to continue our biennial regulatory review. This opportunity to review and revise our regulations with the input from our county and city election officials and the subsequent public outreach and education opportunity is too good to stop. We have made headway and connections with the public that would be foolish to give up now. We also have a big challenge ahead of us as we work to get our new county and city election officials, along with their new staff and my new staff, prepared and ready to execute 3 elections during the 2024 cycle. That is a massive amount of risk that we need to continue to face and address during this legislative session. Experienced election officials are not easy to come by, and we must do what we can to protect them and ensure their continued service for this great state. Finally, we must continue our outreach efforts. Our electoral process is complex, but not magic. There are more we can educate about the public. The more we can educate the public, press, and community leaders, the more we'll be able to build confidence in their trust. We don't make it up as we go along. We simply follow the law and regulation. Explaining this to everyone will demystify the process and help reduce the terrible divisiveness that has become too common for us. And that brings us to our last slide. I'd like to thank the legislature for their continued support during this and previous election cycles. This concludes our presentation. I think you've heard today from our Deputy Velashan about his commitment and his team who's with us today to ensure that our elections in Nevada are done well and maintain a secure environment. So I appreciate the support of the staff and the team and glad to answer any questions that you may have or take any comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Aguilar and Deputy Secretary Velashan, for the thorough presentation. We really appreciate all your hard work, everything you're doing to try to make sure that voting is accessible, safe, and secure. And members, I've had some requests for questions through the email and the chat. If I didn't get you an email and chat, then raise your hand. But first, I'm going to go to Speaker Yeager.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Just a couple of questions. I think they'll be quick. Good to see you, Secretary of State, Mr. Voloshin. Thanks for the presentation. It's really thorough, but I think all of us get asked questions all the time about how some of this works in terms of inactive voters and all that. So it's really helpful for us to have this to be able to refer back to. I wanted to confirm just on one of the slides, Mr. Voloshin, I think you'd indicated that the number, or maybe it was the percentage voters who actually voted by mail in the 2022 election, general election, was actually a greater percentage than voted by mail in the 2020 election. If that's the case, it seems to me like naturally I think it'd be the opposite because of COVID. And I just wanted to confirm that that was the case and ask if you had any insights on why that might have been that we saw higher vote by mail participation percentage-wise in 2022 over 2020.
Thank you for the question, Speaker Yeager. Mr. Chair, through you.
You don't need to do that. Go straight to the member. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker. You are correct. The percentage of votes cast by mail during the 2022 general election was higher. It was closer to a little over 50%, as I recall from the slide. As to why that occurred, I try not to speculate too much on the decisions of the electorate, simply to reflect what they've done. I will say that while the percentage was higher, and certainly from the comments we've received and questions and emails and those sorts of things, phone calls, it definitely indicates that there's an increased preference for vote by mail. But the overall number of voters that used mail during this election cycle were still slightly lower, I think, overall than 2020. But we do anticipate an increased use of mail ballots going forward as well.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a quick follow-up?
Please go ahead, Speaker.
And Mr. Voloshin, I'm not sure if this was in the data you provided, so if it isn't, if you could provide that on the back end. I'm wondering if you have a breakdown in terms of the partisan registration of those who participated using a mail-in ballot. And I think it would be helpful, statewide, of course, but if you're able to break that down by county as well. I know there's some confidentiality there, and we have to be careful of revealing voters' identifications, but if you have that information, I would certainly be interested in seeing it, because I think there's an assumption that certain folks tend to vote more by mail than others, and if I remember correctly, I don't think that's a true assumption when we looked at the last election cycle. So if you could comment on that or get it to the committee, would really appreciate it.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Speaker. Mark Voloshin for the record. We have that information, and I'll make sure that I get it to the staff. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Deputy Voloshin, could you share that with Chair Gorlow and myself, and we'll share it with the committee. Appreciate that. Now I have any follow-up, Mr. Speaker? No. I have a question from Assemblyman De Silva, and then I have Senator Sievers-Gansert, and then Assemblyman DeLong. Assemblyman De Silva.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Secretary and Mr. Deputy Secretary Voloshin for being here today. So we know that cyber attacks on our election apparatus, our voting system, is a fundamental national security concern. And I know that much of this comes from outside of the, as you mentioned in your presentation, outside of the country. But is there any sort of insight you can give us as to some of those attacks that may be coming from within the United States, and what kind of measures we're taking to find these individuals and to bring them into justice?
Thank you for the question, Assemblyman. Mark Voloshin for the record. Specific to the efforts to block cybersecurity attacks, I know our IT guys would lambast me if I go into detail into the different techniques and tools that we use, but I will say that they are numerous, but primarily prophylactic in nature. It's certainly hard to identify, because of VPNs and those sorts of things, the individuals across our country, inside our own borders, that are doing this. Part of the reason why we work so closely with our federal partners to try to identify those individuals. Again, from our point of view, when we identify it, we work closely with our SOS IT team as well as the state IT team. And then from there, it gets referenced off to federal law enforcement agencies who follow up. And frankly, from that point forward, we rarely hear anything back.
Any follow-up, Assemblyman De Silva? No. Senator Sievers-Gansert.
Excuse me. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a couple of questions. So you had talked about clearing someone off the rolls if you were notified of a death. Is that a notification from a county, from a government source, or is that a family member? And then how do you verify them if it's a family member?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. Mark Voloshin for the record. Specific to the process for removing an individual, a voter who has died, there's a couple ways we get that information. The first is through a very tight collaboration that we have with the Department of Vital Statistics. When they have a certified death certificate, which is a document, a series of documents that the Registrar of Vital Statistics has to sign, only once that's certified and confirmed do we get sent that information, and then we remove those individuals from the rolls. We also get them through the Social Security Administration's master death file as well. So those are the two primarily governmental agencies that provide those to us. It is possible, though, that if a family member is concerned about that and has that certified death certificate, they can bring it to their county election official in order to have the individuals removed.
Thank you. And then there was some information provided around investigations, that the complaints are investigated. But I think sometimes there's not as much transparency around that as far as like the number that you're getting and how you're managing them, because we kind of never really hear about the what happens after an investigation. So if you could brief us a little bit on that, that would be helpful.
Thank you. I think it's appropriate for us to come back and give you that report as we build out that process.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary, Deputy Secretary, and Senator Severs-Gansert. Assemblyman DeLong.
Thank you, Chairs. I have a question and then a data request, if that's all right.
Sure.
On the data request, I want to follow on the Speaker's request with regards to information on the election. Could you also break down the vote by mail as how much came in actually by mail versus how much were dropped off during election day? I think that would be an interesting piece of information. The question I have is, could you just go through how the system guarantees that only citizens are registered? I just don't understand how that happens. That'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman, for the question. Mark Voloshin for the record. So there's a couple ways that we make sure that non-citizens are not on our voter registration rolls. The first and foremost, you'll notice at the top of a voter registration application form is the very first question: are you a U.S. citizen? The individuals that sign those voter registration forms are signing under penalty of perjury. So again, the ability for an individual to opt out and to identify that they are not eligible because of a citizenship issue is very, again, first and foremost at the top of the form. Second, in regards to the specifics of the automatic voter registration program that we use to the DMV, individuals who present an immigration document are not eligible to go through that system as well. So that automatically filters them out. So again, individuals that if somebody says I used a green card to get a driver's authorization card, for example, at the DMV, those individuals do not go through the AVR process as well. And lastly, again, as it happens, sometimes individuals do end up on the rolls for some reason or the other. Those individuals most routinely will self-identify that they indicated otherwise, and this happens in small numbers. They'll go to their county clerk or registrar, identify, I think I got a voter card that I shouldn't have. I think I accidentally, or maybe my grandfather checked yes when he didn't realize what he was signing, perhaps. And those individuals get removed immediately as well. Again, very small numbers, but it does happen, and I would be honest about that, so I want to include that in your numbers. Thank you.
Thank you, Deputy Voloshin. Assemblyman DeLong, any follow-up? No. Members, any additional questions for the Secretary or Deputy Secretary? I just have one question. You mentioned that the Help America Vote Act funds are being used to support the e-system to try to make sure that military voters abroad can vote. I wondered, are there any other Help America Vote Act funds currently being provided to the Secretary of State's office, and where are those being used? And if you don't have that now, I'd be glad to follow up offline and I can share it with the committee.
Thank you for the question, Chair. Mark Voloshin for the record. We will get that information for the specific breakdown of how our Help America Vote Act grant is used.
Thank you. And I do have one additional question, Speaker Yeager.
Thank you so much for allowing another question, Chair. Mr. Secretary of State, I was glad to hear you say that there's a one-shot budget request for the top-down voter registration, but what I just wanted to ask is, what is that going to do in terms of our election cycle? Why do we need that? What is the goal of it, and what do we think the impact's going to be in terms of the logistics of the next election?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Through you, Mr. Chair. Francisco Aguilar for the record. Top-down voter registration, what's VREMS, it's appropriately called Voter Registration Election Management System, will allow us to collectively gather the data across all 17 counties and have a central place for the voter rolls and for all elections information. because sometimes you have 17 systems feeding up into the Secretary of State's office, you end up with 17 different processes and 17 different avenues for information. As we talk about our voter rolls and as a universal mail ballot becomes more important in our elections, we need to ensure those voter rolls are as clean as possible and that the right individuals are getting the right ballots. It'll also help us gather data about our state elections to be able to make smarter decisions about where we are making our investments in our systems and also make the right investments in our ballots that are being received by mail. I think you heard today that cost so far is $3.9 million. And as we're able to unify our systems throughout the state, we'll be able to bring those cost savings down to some of our smaller rural counties to ensure they get the resources that they need to run fair and secure elections.
Thank you very much, Secretary. Speaker, any follow-up? Thank you. Any additional questions, members? All right, well, thank you so much for this thorough presentation. Appreciate all the...
Mr. Chair, can I make one?
Yes, Secretary Aguilar.
Okay, Senator Seaver-Gensler, I apologize for the short answer on the investigations, but that is on an ongoing basis in the office now, given the recentness of the 2022 elections. It also involves our securities team, and I'd like for our deputy who runs the securities division and oversees those investigators to be a part of that conversation. So,
Thank you, and I should have started with a thank you to both of you for being here today and the rest of your team members.
thank you.
Appreciate the information. No further questions, then we will now move on to our presentation from the Nevada Commission on Ethics. We are very fortunate today to have not only the Executive Director of the Nevada Commission on Ethics, Ross Armstrong, but we also have the Chair of the Commission on Ethics, Chair Wallen. Appreciate also, I believe, some staff from the Nevada Commission on Ethics. Thank you so much for your patience. We appreciate your presentation today. And, members, if we were to maybe take just a couple of minutes, if anyone needs to use the bathroom, we could just be at ease before we start the next presentation. So if anyone needs to use the restroom, we'll just be at ease for just a couple of minutes. Mr. Armstrong, thank you. Members, we will come back to order, and Mr. Armstrong, we appreciate you being there, and please begin your presentation whenever you like, and members, please take your seats, or we'll come back to order. Thank you for your patience. Please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Orenshaw, Chair Gorlow, members of the committees. I'm Executive Director Ross Armstrong of the Nevada Commission on Ethics. With me driving the slide deck is our Executive Assistant, Carrie Pedroza. And in the audience, we have our Chair, Kim Wallen, and our Associate Counsel, Elizabeth Bassett. So this will be a quick overview of the Nevada Commission on Ethics. Why do we have ethics? The number one reason is Richard Nixon. After the Watergate scandal in the 70s, ethics commissions popped up all across the country, including in Nevada. Our ethics law was first established in 1975, and the federal government followed shortly thereafter. So what this presentation will cover is some basic information about the Commission on Ethics, what our three main functions are, and then a little bit of legislative history and a preview of what you might see this particular session. One of the things I really like when I go train a bunch of our agencies is I highlight your legislative declaration that begins our ethics law, and that is, a public office is a public trust and shall be held for the sole benefit of the people. It's for the sole benefit of the people, not for the sole benefit of the people in government, not for the sole benefit of family and friends of people in government, but for the sole benefit of the people. And so as I launch into like a 90-minute training, I'd say, if you just remember this one rule, we're gonna go over a bunch of rules, but if you remember this one rule, you're gonna stay on track with the ethics law pretty well. On the next slide, you can see the Nevada Commission on Ethics mission. I think the one part I always underline for myself is that we strive to enhance the public's faith and confidence in government. We know that over the last number of years, there have been certainly threats to the public's faith and confidence in our government. Where is the ethics law? We're in chapter 281A of the Nevada Revised Statutes. That's where all of our ethics laws and our rules live. We have an administrative code, but our administrative code, rather than really have a lot of regulations over our public officers and employees, it kind of serves more like our procedural manual for how the commission operates. So if you want to know if something's against the ethics law, go to the NRS instead of the Nevada Administrative Code. We have three major functions. The first one is education and outreach. So we provide education and outreach to governments across Nevada. We also provide advisory opinions. Any public officer or employee, if they're facing a question about how the ethics law applies to their situation, can ask the commission to consider their facts and issue a formal advisory opinion. So we'll talk about those. And then the one that gets the most media attention, of course, is when we receive and process complaints that are filed against public officials. A little bit about our commission structure. We have 8 commissioners. 4 are appointed by the governor and 4 are appointed by the legislature. There you can see the ones appointed by the legislature have the asterisk next to them. There's some other requirements about the commission. We can have no more than 4 members from the same political party on the commission. Commissioners are prohibited from being actively involved in a campaign or political party. And then there's some requirements about the number of former public officers, employees, and the number of attorneys that have to be on the commission. Below that, you can see our commission staff. We are a small but mighty team of 6. We're currently 5. We had our commission counsel retire in December, and we're still trying to figure out how to fill that vacancy. But there's 6 of us. We have jurisdiction over about 140,000 Nevadans, fit the definition of a public officer or employee. So if you do like a caseload, some agencies have caseloads. There's about 1 ethics employee for every 23,000 people in the state. So what type of people are covered under the jurisdiction of the Nevada ethics law? Public officers, which are individuals who are established, that position is established in law, right? So our constitutional officers, anytime that you pass a law that establishes like a commission, those individuals, their positions are established by law, and so they become public officers. Also local governments, right? If a city council says there shall be a public director or a director of public works, that director is a public officer. And then there's also public employees, which is really anyone who works for a public officer. So that captures everyone else that works for a government in Nevada. And then in some cases, cooling off cases, we have jurisdiction over people who are former public officers or employees for 1 year after they leave public service. Who's not covered? We get a lot of inquiries about people who are not covered in the ethics law. And so here's the list. We don't have any jurisdiction over private individuals, the judiciary, federal government employees, and campaigns. Now, there are times when a public officer or employee will be campaigning, and so we have jurisdiction over that public officer or employee, but we get a lot of inquiries about campaigns, and that's the guy you just heard from, not me. There are, since coming to the Ethics Commission, it's easy for me to kind of put the different ethics rules in 3 different buckets. And so those 3 buckets include improper benefits, which is essentially a government employee using government resources to create a benefit for themselves or someone they have what we call a commitment in a private capacity to. We have our disclosure and abstention rules, which require transparency about relationships you might have on matters that a public officer is voting on or a public employee might be acting on. And then we have those cooling off provisions I talked about for 1 year after someone leaves public office. There are some restrictions on who they can work for and what they can do. The key term, the one I think that we have some people stumble into ethics issues is they're not thinking about their commitments in a private capacity, and it's a term sprinkled throughout the ethics law. The ethics law says there are certain relationships that automatically create a conflict of interest, right? Now, having a conflict of interest, having a relationship is not a bad thing. We bring our whole selves to our public service. But if those private commitments come into intersection with our public duties, then we need to be thinking about the ethics law and how to remain ethical. So those relationships you can see on that list include a spouse or domestic partner, a member of your household, someone within the 3rd degree of consanguinity or affinity. So for those of you that had like a trust and estates law class, you have the flashbacks to that. It's just the legal way of figuring out how close someone is related to you. The ethics law doesn't care if you like your family. If they're within the 3rd degree of consanguinity, it's going to create a conflict of interest. Then also employers or individuals that have a substantial and continuing business relationship create this commitment in a private capacity. And then there's this catch-all category that says if it's a relationship substantially similar to those other ones, it will also count as something you need to be thinking about. And for that, we look towards commission opinions. And so the commission in the past, just some examples for you have found, for example, service on a nonprofit board. Right, you have a fiduciary duty to that board, and so that's similar to a substantial and continuing business relationship, and so you need to be thinking about if that board comes into contact with your public life, or long-standing and close friendships can be substantially similar to a relative, right? So those would be some examples of what might fit in the substantially similar category. Let's talk about those 3 major functions that I mentioned. In the last calendar year, we were able to provide like live in-person training for 1,562 individuals who got trained by our agency. You can see there, because we cover city, county, state, kind of all those other different, quirky forms of government throughout the state. So we were able to train all of those. The big chunk of other, like when I did the chart, I said, oh, that's a big chunk of other. A decent chunk of that was we trained at the Civil Attorneys Conference. So all the government civil attorneys get together once a year. So it's like 250 attorneys that then actually go help those state, city, and county agencies. As you can see, we have a capacity issue. If you take a look at 140,000 employees, we were able to get to 1,500. That's about 1% of the folks who have to comply with the ethics law. We were able to actually go train. So what are we doing about that capacity issue? We're working on modernizing our education and outreach approach. We're working on leveraging social media, right? So injecting some ethics education into people's feeds as they're scrolling through their phones or on their computers. We've started a process of recording and uploading topic-specific videos up on YouTube. So if you just need a quick reminder about disclosure or cooling off, you can go there. You don't have to listen to an entire training session. And then with the help of some ARPA funding, we're working on standing up an online learning management system, which will allow on-demand training for public officers and employees into the future. And then as a preview, we've also, it's in the governor's recommended budget, requesting a public information officer during this legislative session to coordinate all those education and outreach positions. Our next major function is advisory opinions. I talked about how a public officer or employee can request an advisory opinion. This is the process. They submit a request. They work with our commission counsel or another attorney in our office to kind of get all of those facts down that are relevant. They draft an opinion and then it goes to the commission votes, and then the opinion is issued. In that process, that whole process is confidential, but at the very end of the process, the individual can decide whether to waive confidentiality. In that case, the opinion is published. If they don't waive their confidentiality, then we rewrite the opinion to remove their name and their agency so that you can't tell who requested the opinion, but others can still read what the commission decided as a helpful tool. We talk about volume. We'll go through a bunch of stats, but essentially what we know is that in fiscal year 22, we really rebounded from a slide during the COVID pandemic. So we are back to our regular, or actually we exceed where we were in the past. It's tricky because we start this chart in fiscal year 19. In the annual report that we've given you, there's some analysis of data in the back, but the advisory opinions, the 5-year average prior to fiscal year 19 was 13 a year. So that was kind of the commission's general caseload until fiscal year 19, and then we started to see people understand that there was an ethics commission that could issue advisory opinions, and we've shot back up. Some interesting information about advisory opinions, like who requested them and what they were about. You can see that we get a lot of advisory opinions requests about cooling off, right? As folks are leaving public service, that's kind of a planned event, and so they ask about who they can go work for and what they can do. And you can see that we provided that service pretty evenly to city, county, and state agencies. So everyone at all levels of government is accessing the advisory opinion process. The third major function is complaints, and this is when an individual files a complaint with our office. They believe somebody has violated the ethics law. The first step for the commission is to determine whether or not we have jurisdiction, right? If somebody files a complaint against their neighbor because they're an unethical parker, we're not going to deal with that, right? But we still go through the process of analyzing the jurisdiction and then may issue a dismissal. If the commission accepts jurisdiction, they direct me to start an investigation. And at the conclusion of that investigation, the case then goes to a 3-commissioner panel. That panel determines if there's sufficient evidence to send the case to the commission for a full adjudicatory hearing. Sometimes we get a complaint, it all looks like really bad, right? And then we go investigate and realize that none of that actually occurred. And so sometimes my recommendation to the panel is this case should be dismissed, right? This is not worthy of this is not an ethics issue, dismiss this case. And so the 5 remaining commissioners who weren't part of the panel hear the adjudicatory hearing. Once the panel determination is when the case becomes public. So an ethics complaint is confidential from the time we receive it until a panel determination is made. We can't stop someone who has filed a complaint from, say, going to the media and saying, I've filed a complaint, but we won't confirm or deny that a complaint has been filed until that panel determination has been issued and then certain documents become public. So where do we look like in terms of our ethics complaints? Again, we've rebounded from a dip during the pandemic. The 5-year average before fiscal year 19 was 61 complaints. So far, year to date, we're at 59 complaints. Well, actually, we got like 5 this week, so we're probably like at 64 for this particular fiscal year. I think the most interesting data about complaints is what we did. So the vast majority are dismissed, either because we don't have jurisdiction or there's insufficient evidence. I think what we see is a lot of individuals out there frustrated or angry with the decisions their government is making, and so they think it's unethical in their gut, right? They don't know that the ethics law just focuses on certain ethical provisions, but they feel like it's unethical in their gut, and so they file a complaint, and when we do the review, it's just not part of the ethics law. But you can see the different resolutions there. The most are dismissed, and then leaning on our goal of educating and providing outreach to folks, letters of instruction and caution are sort of like a warning letter or instructive letter, where it's clear they might not understand the ethics law rules, and so we help clarify for that for them going forward. You can see in terms of where our complaints coming from, 50% came from the county in that fiscal year, in fiscal year 22. I'll tell you that in taking a deeper dive, we had a lot of folks frustrated with their school boards, and so we had a lot of complaints against school board trustees. We did not have a lot of complaints against school board trustees that actually were about the ethics law, right? There was just a lot of emotion wrapped up in school boards in the last year. The next slide, I think, is kind of helpful because it kind of shows you the life of an ethics complaint from the moment it's filed until it gets investigated or sent to that review panel determination. And you can see where those 96 complaints ended up. We had a big rush in June, so that's why at the end of the fiscal year there were still 18 pending. We have by law 45 days to make that that jurisdictional determination, which sounds like a lot of time, but we have to receive the complaint, staff prepares a recommendation, that recommendation goes to the 8 commissioners, the 8 commissioners have to have time to vote and respond, and then we have to issue the determination all within that 45 days. But that's just kind of I think it's a helpful visual to see what happens in the life of an ethics complaint. One of the things that we do, one of the ramifications for violating ethics law can be a civil penalty. And so this next chart shows the civil penalties collected by the commission over the last several years. There are 2 ways that a civil penalty might be triggered under the ethics law. One is if the individual financially benefited from their unethical behavior. The Ethics Commission has the ability to capture that money and actually double the amount of money that they benefited from and use that as a civil penalty. The other one is the commission, when it determines that an ethics violation has occurred, determines if it's willful or non-willful. If it's a willful or more serious violation, there are flat civil penalties. And so you might be asking what happened in fiscal year 20 and 21 to have such big civil penalties that year, and that was the LVCVA Southwest gift card issue. That created a big spike. And you can see so far for this fiscal year, we're at about 12,000. If I had to guess, we'll probably end the fiscal year about 25,000 in fees collected. Some legislative history, since we're here at the start of a legislative session. I said the first commission was established in 1975. The Supreme Court quickly said it was unconstitutionally vague, and so the legislature came back in 1977. At that time, it established 2 separate commissions, a legislative commission and executive branch commission. And what they found was that over the time that they had those 2 separate commissions, neither commission was really fully funded or resourced, and so neither really met all that often. And in 1985, the legislature decided to bring those 2 commissions back to the commission that we have now. Since that law, we've had some Supreme Court cases and some bills that have narrowed the jurisdiction of the commission over legislators, noting that we don't have jurisdiction over your core legislative functions, the separation of powers issue. And then AB 496 of the 2015 session further narrowed some of the jurisdiction the commission has over the legislative branch. Last year, we did have a bill, AB 65, that had the overarching goals of enhancing and clarifying ethical standards of conduct, creating some stronger confidentiality and some procedural streamlining. That bill was amended by the Ways and Means Committee, and it removed that amendment 777 completely removed the legislature from the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. The legislature then approved that bill, and the Governor Sisolak vetoed the bill. He noted he had support for the substantive parts of AB 65, but had concerns with creating 2 commissions based on the prior experience with 2 commissions. So that's what happened last session, and this upcoming session, we have been given the number Assembly Bill 66, which has a number of those same things that were in the bill last year. We've taken out, there were some concerns on like endless extensions and some of the qualifications for jobs, so those have been removed. We've kind of narrowed the scope of this bill from the last session's bill, but we look forward to having a hearing on that bill and being able to go into the details about what those procedures are, or what those proposals are, and how they might enhance the Ethics Commission for the people of the state of Nevada. And with that, that is my presentation. I'm happy to take questions or comments at this time.
Thank you very much for your presentation, Director Armstrong. Members, any questions? Assemblyman De Silva.
Thank you, Director Armstrong, for your excellent presentation. I also have a question about, it's more from a curiosity of mine, a historical curiosity. So I know we saw the actual like proliferation of these laws at the federal and at the state level post mid-70s, late 70s and onwards. So I'm pretty sure that ethics issues have always been around even before that. So my question was, like, before the mid-70s, what was the real process? How did we investigate these things, and what kind of, did we have any sort of a legal process?
Yeah, Executive Director Armstrong, for the record, I can't give you a, like, I absolutely know answer. I will say that I think, at least in the legislative branch, members have always policed themselves, right, and had procedures for working with members who may not be ensuring the public trust. I think short of that, you have to then take a look at your criminal statutes, right? There are a number of crimes like bribery and embezzlement and those types of things that would have provided ramifications prior to the springing up of ethics laws.
Thank you, Director. Thank you, Assemblyman. Members, any additional questions? Speaker Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good to see you, Mr. Armstrong, and good to see you, Chair, as well. I just had a question about, you took us through the process, but when you get to the end of this process, what are the appellate rights that kick in there? Do they appeal to a court? And then just wondered if you had any data on how many final determinations were appealed and what the outcomes were.
Yes, Executive Director Armstrong, thank you for that question. It's a great question. The appeal rights, we follow the Nevada Administrative Procedures Act. It's an adjudicatory hearing, and so if someone disagrees with the outcome of an adjudicatory hearing, then they can file a petition for judicial review and go through that process. What we have found is that we have very few cases that result in an adjudicatory hearing. We, like most judicial or quasi-judicial processes have a lot of stipulated and agreed upon resolutions. One of the things I think is important for the commission is that education and outreach. And so if we have an opportunity to have a stipulation where the individual agrees to maybe a lesser number of violations, but they also agree to go back and get training on ethics or have their team back at their agency get trained in ethics or change some of their local agency policies or procedures so that it avoids these ethical issues, then that's something certainly the commission always takes into consideration.
Thank you. Any follow-up, Speaker? Members, any additional questions? Assemblywoman Newby.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the advisory papers or advisory opinions that you said that you provide, what's your turnaround time on those? And I only ask because as a public official and a former public official seeking that guidance, sometimes it's because there's an issue coming up in a certain time frame that you need an opinion on. And I always found I couldn't get the opinion in time.
Yeah, this is Director Armstrong. In our statute, we have a 45-day time limit to provide an advisory opinion. What happens a lot of times is we get a request and we don't have enough information to actually issue an opinion, and so we'll reach out to the public official and say, here's like 10 questions that will help us be able to issue an advisory opinion. When those are returned, that will restart the 45-day clock. I think the issue you're talking about is which we see a lot. We get like a phone call from a city council person that says, I have a vote tomorrow and I need to know how to handle this particular potential conflict of interest, and there's no way we can turn around an advisory opinion in that time period, and so we try to guide them to their agency attorney for that particular advice, and we can help the agency attorney find previous cases similar so they can give solid legal advice. But for a formal advisory opinion that is well researched and voted on by the commission, we have that 45-day process.
Thank you very much. And members, anyone I'm missing? One question I had, you mentioned complaints on some local boards, and I think in the news media we've heard about board members on certain boards filing complaints against each other. If you find that a complaint was, let's say, retaliatory or unfounded, is there any penalty against the person who filed the report if it's frivolous or anything like that? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Director Armstrong, again, for the record. We used to have a process where if somebody was just filing complaints over and over again and they were in bad faith, where we would stop accepting complaints from that person, and that was legally challenged and determined not allowed. And so there are no current, we have no ramifications if somebody keeps filing a complaint other than to keep dismissing the complaint as baseless. We do have the one area where we do have some ability to take action is if we're in an investigation and someone intentionally interferes with that investigation. If they're not the subject of the complaint, then we have a process where we can bring a matter against them and fine them for their interference with the process. But it's difficult. I think after a certain number of times, folks kind of realize that we're not going to take jurisdiction on something just because they're angry at their fellow person. But the court has ruled everyone has a right to keep filing complaints if they believe the law has been violated.
Thank you very much, Director. Well, I really appreciate the thorough presentation. Thank you so much for the information, and I look forward to seeing you as your legislation makes its way through the legislative process. So now I think the last item on our agenda is public comment. So first I'll go here to Carson City. If there's anyone who wishes to make public comment, please come forward. Okay, I don't see anyone in Carson City. Down at the Sawyer Building in Las Vegas, I can't tell if it looks like no one's in there, but if there's someone there behind the pole, now's your chance to make public comment. All right, it doesn't look like we have anyone at the Sawyer Building. Broadcasting, is there anyone on the phone lines who would like to make public comment? And we can wait a few moments just to give anybody time to call in.
Thank you, Chair Orenshaw. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time. Would you like me to stand by for a moment?
For just a moment, and I know if I could just believe the, one moment. If I could just announce the phone number if anybody would like to call and make public comment. That number is area code 669-900-6833. And then you'll be prompted to enter a meeting ID. That meeting ID is 850-661-90340. Again, the phone number to call is area code 669-900-6833. When you're prompted, the meeting ID will be 850-661-90340. And members, if I can indulge on you, I think we'll just wait a minute, see if there's anybody who needs to call in. And broadcasting, if we could just wait a minute and see if anyone joins us.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair. Chair, the public line is still open and working, and we do not have any callers at this time. Would you like to stand by for a moment more?
With members' indulgence, we could give it maybe another 30 seconds just in case someone's trying to log in.
Certainly. Thank you, Chair.
Broadcasting, just wanted to check and see if anybody called in for public comment.
Thank you so much, Chair. No, I'm sorry. The public line is still open and working. However, we have no public comment callers at this time.
All right. Members, thank you for your indulgence. With that, before I adjourn, our Senate committee will be meeting next Tuesday, and I don't know, Chair Gorlow, do you want to make an announcement about your next Assembly committee meeting?
Thank you. We are actually meeting with you guys.
That's correct. We're having a joint meeting, and at that one, Chair Gorlow will be chairing. So I'll be handing the gavel over to her. So thank you. It's been a pleasure serving with all my friends from over in the Assembly, and with that, we are adjourned.